Hello, today we are going to explain the plot of the movie as If I Am Not There, which was released in 2012. Well, let's start with the story. In the years of 1992 to 1995, there was a conflict in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In a hospital, a young girl named Samira is seen staring at her newborn baby with a flat expression on her face. Then she bathing under the shower while postpartum blood runs down her legs. Before this life-changing event, Samira was just a teacher from Sarajevo, who one day got a job in a remote village in Bosnia. Before leaving, she joked with her sister about putting on a top and the shoes she would bring, then got ready to go. Her father then put a headscarf on her head and wrapped it around her neck like a scarf. Then she said goodbye to her parents and sister, telling them to take care of their parents. After walking, Samira boarded a bus where she sat next to a middle-aged man who seemed so comfortable that he fell asleep on her shoulder. During the ride, Samira seemed to enjoy the view from the bus window while listening to music on her headphones. Not long after, she arrived at her destination, the elementary school where she would teach. She entered the classroom and tried to recognize the room for a moment. After a while, she went to the dormitory where she would be staying while she was there. Not far from there, she lived here alone without a roommate. The next day, she hurried to school. He was a little late. Some students were already waiting outside the classroom. The class began with introductions. She introduced herself as Samira, a temporary substitute teacher from Sarajevo. One of her students tells her that the teacher won't come back, just like before. Another says she has nothing to fear if she has nothing to hide. After class, Samira called from a payphone, but no one answered. Not far from her, several men seemed to be watching her. Samira and her students were now studying and playing in the hills. In the distance, she could see smoke from the nearby countryside. That night, she wrote a letter to her parents. She did not know how to explain the life there, but she smiled at a picture of her family. The next morning, she heard a commotion that woke her up. An old woman who looked panicked was being approached by several armed soldiers. Samira hurriedly hid her valuables and changed her clothes. She looked out of the window and saw that the two soldiers were now passing by her home. Samira went into the kitchen to make some coffee when a young man with a gun entered the kitchen. The man looked like an armed civilian because of his shoes, so Samira offered him coffee. The man accepted Samira's offer. Then, while drinking the coffee, the man looked around the kitchen where Samira was drying some clothes. The man then told Samira to pack her things and get on the bus with the others. Samira objected because she was only a teacher and not a local, saying that she was from Sarajevo and would only be there for a few months. However, the man insisted that Samira come along immediately. And inevitably, Samira came along with the other residents around her. The soldier did not even hesitate to fire his gun in the air to speed them up. Before they left, they were gathered in a room with several armed men. Their leader came in and announced that he had orders to remove everyone from the village and ordered the men to leave first. All the men, young and old, were separated from their families and taken away. And soon shots rang out in rapid succession. The women and children were led onto the buses. Samira didn't want to get on at first, but there was no chance of escape, so she got on. Several military buses and trucks left the village in the middle of nowhere. Samira's bus arrived at a place that was guarded by armed soldiers at night. They were told to get off and enter a warehouse. The door was closed after they all entered. Because it was late at night and they were tired, Samira tried to sleep on a makeshift mat. The next morning, the door was opened. They were all told to get up and leave their belongings where they were. Then they were escorted to an open field and told to urinate on the spot. At first, they looked confused, but eventually they squatted down to obey the order. Samira noticed the surrounding buildings, which were all the same size and distance apart, after which they were all given a piece of bread and a sausage. But Samira gave the sausage to the little boy behind her. Then she noticed an old lady who seemed to be sick, so she went around looking for help, but there was no doctor around, only a nurse. The nurse who helped examine her said it was better that she didn't know what was going on here. The woman turned out to be carrying a doctor's bag, which she admitted had been taken from the men's camp. Samira hadn't expected there to be a men's camp as well. Later, Samira and the other women were told to line up to wash their faces and hands. Samira heard someone calling for her child. Quickly, Samira helped her find the little boy, who turned out to be not far away. The child just wanted to see a butterfly. In the evening, the army increased. Some of them entered the women's camp and took one of the prisoners by force. The next morning, some of the women in the camp were lined up and selected. They consisted of 3 adult women and 1 child. Samira watched where they were taken. As it turned out, they were taken to another room in a separate building. The nurse said she had been informed by a cook that the soldiers were running out of food and couldn't keep them any longer. She believed they should be prepared for an exchange that could happen at any time. Samira was next, taken alone to another building and told to wait in an empty room. 3 men came in with alcoholic drinks, and one of them told Samira to take off her clothes and serve them in turn. They didn't let her go immediately, but did more painful things to her until she fainted. And she was brought back to the camp in a terrible condition, with bruises in her eyes and a body full of wounds. When she woke up, Samira woke up in a different camp than before. She woke up on a bed with a small child and 3 other women in it, so tired that she continued to sleep. The next morning, an old woman brought them a pot of soup. In the evening, some soldiers came and took all the women in the room with them, except Samira. Not long after, a little boy returned. Samira helped him to clean his hands. He told her that his cousin Tahira hadn't returned yet. Samira said that maybe she had run away, but the boy didn't believe her because his cousin wouldn't have left him. Samira accompanied the child to sleep until the next morning. And while she was combing the child's hair, a soldier took her to the room yesterday. Samira was afraid at first that she would be again, but the soldier just wanted to lie down while he held Samira. Back in the room, Samira was reading a book to the little boy and teaching him some vocabulary, but she stopped when she heard footsteps outside the room. Sure enough, a soldier entered the room and immediately spoke to the little boy. It turned out that the man was Boyan, his brother's friend. He then took the child away. Samira waited anxiously until the evening for the child's return. As it turned out, the child returned the next day in an unfortunate condition. His back was badly injured with a cut in the shape of a +. Samira quickly sent others to ask for antiseptic for the wound. She tried to comfort the boy by telling him a bedtime story about the main character named Tahira. The next morning, when the child had not yet woken up, Samira checked his temperature and found that he was gone. The child's departure made Samira's spirit rise. She was not willing to just be treated like an animal by the soldiers. She also dressed up to look more beautiful and ready to win the hearts of the soldiers. The other women didn't like to see her dressed up. They thought she looked cheap, but nothing happened until the next day. Samira was called into the office of a captain, who asked her about her background, such as her name, where she came from, and her profession. This soldier captain also had a wife and children, so Samira tried to strike up a conversation with him while smoking a cigarette. In the evening, as Samira was getting ready to go to the captain's camp, one of the female prisoners gave her a small bag and asked her to go find her family. A soldier escorted her back to the captain's room. During the meal, the man told her that he used to hate school and asked Samira to talk to him about something, but she asked permission to go to the bathroom for a while. After that, they talked on the sofa. Samira still didn't want to talk about anything. Slowly, the man started to seduce Samira until he invited her to sleep with him. Samira was told to return to the camp the next morning. When she returned, the women in the camp asked her to tell them what happened last night. But Samira did not say anything. She immediately took a shower. Later that night, Samira was called back to the leader's room. This time, she didn't have time to get dressed, but the man invited her to shower in his room. They slept together until the next day. Before going home, Samira had breakfast and secretly brought some bread and medicine for her friends in the camp. While eating the bread, they asked what the captain looked like. Samira didn't say anything, but she told them what the captain had done to her. Meanwhile, the war situation was heating up. Samira kept dressing up so that whenever the captain called her, she would be ready. When she passed by the men's camp, she saw several bodies being burned. One night, the captain called her again, but before she could do anything, he was summoned by his men, leaving Samira alone in the living room. At that time, she took the moment to try to call, but the line was busy. Suddenly, shots rang out from below. Samira looked out of the window and saw that the captain had shot someone. The man said he was just doing what he had to do to survive, just like Samira, who had to do what he told her to do if she wanted to survive. After that, he allowed Samira to leave. When she returned to her room, Samira's friends accused her of knowing rumors about the exchange, but Samira knew nothing about it either. Day after day, Samira waited. Until one day, a woman who used to bring food to her room took her to a room. In that room, a woman Samira knew from before was lying with a blue face and a bottle of poison beside her, and her son was also dead. So, Samira said, there was no hope for them. The next day, all the prisoners were put on the bus except Samira, and the captain had his men hold her down and take her to his office. Samira said that she would not complain about anything, while Samira's fate was decided by the captain. He said that Samira would be exchanged or released. This exchange meant that Samira was free outside the territory, The captain gave her money and told her to leave immediately. Samira reluctantly took the money, but ran out of the captain's office and onto the bus. On the bus, the passengers watched the houses destroyed by the war. Suddenly, halfway through the bus stopped by the river, all passengers were asked to get off and cross the bridge to change buses. The bridge was guarded by several armed soldiers. Samira and the other passengers had to climb the hills and wait for the buses that were driving in the distance. As soon as the buses approached, they immediately ran down to greet them happily. Sometime later, Samira was free and back to her normal life. It is now winter, and Samira is sitting across from a doctor in the hospital discussing the fate of her pregnancy. It became clear that Samira did not want the baby and left her fate to the hospital, but the hospital could not agree to her request to abort the baby. It only offered what support it could, and Samira didn't even have any relatives to take care of the baby. Samira left feeling distraught and decided to get some fresh air at the beach. A few months passed. Samira was living alone in her apartment. She had just come home from shopping and was watching TV. Her belly was getting bigger and bigger, indicating that she was about to give birth, and day after day she walked around her apartment alone. One day, while visiting her parents, her mother was shocked to see her water break while they were having dinner, so Samira was immediately taken to the hospital. Shortly after, her baby was born. It was a boy, and wearing a bracelet named Leglik. After taking a shower, Samira looked at her baby. She took a pair of scissors to cut off the baby's bracelet, then went back to her room. The next time, the baby was placed next to her again. Samira still didn't want to touch the baby, so she took the family photo she kept behind the pillow and put it on the baby's bed. She looked at the baby for a moment. Then Samira began to hold the baby and breastfeed him while he cried. The nurse who peeked through the door looked relieved to see that Samira was willing to breastfeed the baby.